Thank you for joining me. Some wild stuff coming up tonight. And Scott Morrison quits. Should Conservatives finally forgive him? Also, a former ABC chairman calls for an end to its government funding as leftist staff condemn their boss for not letting the ABC be even more racist, more anti-Israel. Can you believe it? Also tonight, a Ukrainian helicopter pilot and why the Albanese government should reverse its crazy decision to bury 45 Taipan helicopters rather than give them to Ukraine. But first, this hatred of Australia has become a farce. And maybe our best response now is to just laugh at these jokers as they go crazy competing to be holier than thou. Take Cricket Australia and the Test team. They haven't just banned Australia Day ceremonies at the Gabba Test, starting on Thursday. These guys even choke at mentioning the words Australia Day. It's like it's been banned. I'll give you two examples. First, here's the head of Cricket Australia, English bloke, on 2GB this morning with Ben Fordham, having two goes, a big pause and some filibustering before finally managing to say those terrible words.
What day is it on Friday?
Friday is the 26th of January. It's the Australia Day public holiday weekend.
We'll take Pat Cummins, captain of the Test team, today getting very emotional about playing at the Gabba in front of Australians on, oh God, can't mention what day it is.
It's going to be close to a sellout at the Gabba. It's going to be really well supported. I think we're all going to, celebrate. Anyway, it's a tough day. It means different things to different people.
Do they know how stupid they look? I mean, different things to different people. I mean, that's Woolworth's excuse too, which means essentially that if some activists, for some dumb reasons or just for a power flex, say, oh, we hate Australia Day, the rest of us have got to shut up, give in to the intolerant haters. You see, the weird thing is that Cummins said today, well, this is in fact the best country in the world. So it would be nice if you could actually say that on Australia Day. Be helpful. Be nice if you could say that often and explain exactly why. Instead, he today spun a fable that he would celebrate Australia Day if we just chose another date for it. Not January 26th, the anniversary of the landing here of the first British convicts and their guards.
Australia Day is meant to be a celebration of everything Australia and our history. I think we could choose a better date.
Look, Pat Cummins, great bowler, handsome bloke, good captain of the Australian Test team, but seriously unsmart on this issue. If there is a better date, why doesn't Cummins simply name it? No, the fact is, you see, that these haters, if they really do think Australia's founded on genocide and theft and racism and it's a nation founded by evil colonialists who destroyed the supposedly wonderful Aboriginal civilization, then there is simply no date in the calendar that they will ever say, well, in that case, gee, Australia, what a terrific country. Let us celebrate. I mean, can you imagine any day in the calendar where someone like Senator Lydia Thorpe would celebrate this nation and not instead wave around her war stick like she does on Australia Day, scream genocide, demand Aboriginal rule? I mean, these people are having you on. You either celebrate Australia Day or you don't. And January 26th is as good a day as any other. It's the anniversary of the day when we had to start working out painfully but steadily how to share this continent, how to get along, whatever race we are. And look what we've achieved since. Isn't that worth celebrating? I should add, by the way, that the head of Cricket Australia was so embarrassed by his performance that he later announced good news. Cricket Australia, yes, it has banned Australia Day, but the ground announcer at the Gabba might mention it. I mean, whoopee-doo. But it's also dumb now. I mean, two last examples. First, here's Marcus Stewart. He's the former head of the First People's Assembly, demanding that the Victorian Liberal leader say sorry for now saying that he won't back a treaty between the Victorian government and Aborigines, well, like Stewart himself, handing over control of land, tourism sites, money.
The disrespect shown to our community, to our elders and to the First People's Assembly of Victoria is absolutely absurd. They owe the Assembly an apology or he should resign as opposition leader.
Well, I know Marcus Stewart. We've talked. He's a nice guy. Yes, he does have an Aboriginal ancestor. He should have declared, by the way, that his wife is a Victorian Labor MP. I think that needed to be said. But to think that Marcus Stewart, having a few Aboriginal ancestors, besides all his European ones, that somehow entitles him to special treatment because he's so different to you and me and everyone else because of his race, that entitles him to a bigger say over our land, to a treaty, that is a joke. I mean, these race games, they're all a joke. If they weren't so dangerous. I mean, dividing people into tribes, into races, pitting them against each other in a battle for power in a zero-sum game, exploiting resentments instead of looking for what unites. Where's that going? And just the final example, Penelope. It's a kind of hipster dude restaurant in Sydney's Circular Quay. Says it's going to offer a special menu on Australia Day, except it's an Invasion Day menu instead. And the new owner from a Vietnamese family says this is to support Aborigines. And the menu is going to include cooked kangaroo and reportedly halal pack. Now, just got to wonder, what kind of poseur thinks, Invasion Day, I think I should mark this terrible day of grief and genocide by going to an upmarket restaurant and stuffing my face from the Invasion Day menu. That I should taste the Invasion Day menu's salsa vietnamita. What a virtue signalling fake. And secondly, why serve a Vietnamese salsa and a Muslim halal snack pack on Invasion Day? Because what invasion of Australia are they then actually talking about? Hypocrites. Why don't they just celebrate that this country welcomed the Vietnamese and the Arabs as well, instead of whining about the wicked Anglos who built what you now enjoy? Now, to the big political news of the day, or is it? I don't know. Former Liberal Prime Minister Scott Morrison is quitting Parliament. Sky News broker Andrew Clennell. And for Conservatives, it's going to be this question: are we sorry? Now, Morrison today said he would leave Parliament at the end of the month and work in the global corporate sector and spend more time with his family. He's going to give global strategic advice, serve on private boards, connected apparently to his work on defence alliances he struck as PM with the US, Britain, Japan and India. Now, Morrison thanked especially his Deputy Leader in Government, Josh Frydenberg, Deputy PMs Michael McCormack and Barnaby Joyce, wish Peter Dutton the best, la-da-da. Now, the jobs that Morrison is going to should remind us of his strengths. He did see the China threat. He did confront China. He did move to build alliances against it. He junked Malcolm Turnbull's terrible plan for French submarines and signed a deal with the US and Britain for nuclear ones. And by the way, he stopped the country from going into a recession in the pandemic. Pity about all the spending. And the Liberals indeed once loved him for winning an election against Bill Shorten's Labor Party against all the odds and most of the polls.
I have always believed in miracles.
Against that, though, Morrison refused to fight the culture wars and was destroyed by them. When his Pentecostal faith was mocked and Liberal staffer Brittany Higgins falsely smeared his government as uncaring after she was allegedly raped at Parliament House, a crime that she's actually never proved. And Morrison also did cave into the global warming scare, committing the Liberals to net zero emissions, despite earlier threatening to take on the fossil fuel hysterics in Labor.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared.
And all that he really achieved was to make the Liberals look insincere to their enemies and a sellout to their supporters. And Morrison's political antenna went haywire, of course. He took a holiday in Hawaii during bushfires and snapped at his return.
No, I don't hold a hose, mate.
And when he foolishly went to a left-wing part of the burned-out country, got snubbed while seeming pathetically anxious to shake hands, look, it was all over for him. He never recovered. Joining me is Nationals MP Matt Canavan, the former Resources Minister, who I think Morrison should have had in his government, although that wasn't Morrison's decision. That's just a shame. Matt Canavan, thank you so much for your time. Scott Morrison's legacy. First, tell us the best bits.
Well, the best bits you've gone over a little bit here. The best bits are the ones where Scott was standing up for conservative values. He's a real fighter. He helped protect our borders. I mean, we should all give him thanks for that. And you look around the world at the moment, he helped secure our borders as Immigration Minister. You're right to say he saw the China threat early and helped pivot the Australian government following Malcolm Turnbull, also identified that issue, and that's going to stand the test of time. He obviously then signed the AUKUS agreement, and you also mentioned he won the 2019 election. He won that election after he held up coal in the Australian Parliament, and he fought for the coal industry, fought for mining jobs, fought for the Adani mine, and delivered that result. It was after when he sort of went to holding up solar panels in the Parliament, if you like, and signed up to net zero, things went awry. And I suppose that's there's a good lesson from Scott Morrison's time as Prime Minister and Senior Minister in government for the coalition today, and that is we succeed more when we're authentic, when we authentically fight for our principles and values. We do pretty well. When we try and cravenly secure the votes of those who don't like us and are on the other side of politics, it doesn't go all that well for us. And I think that'll be the lesson from Scott Morrison's career.
I think that's brilliantly summed up. Matt, there's going to be a by-election in Sydney seat of Cook in April. Look, the Liberals hold it with a big margin of 12.5%. I don't think that's going to fall to Labor at all, so no drama there. But so let's switch to Labor then, and the government that replaced Morrison's, Albanese's. All sorts of strife trying to work out what it's going to do with the stage 3 tax cuts the Morrison government designed, and Anthony Albanese did promise before the last election to deliver exactly the same tax relief in full. Here he is.
People are entitled to have that certainty of the tax cuts that have been legislated.
Stage 3 is absolutely locked in?
Yes.
There are no circumstances under which you would seek to roll back stage 3?
No.
Matt, unfortunately, there's now speculation the government's going to increase the promised tax cuts to people under $200,000 a year, but cut them for people above that. It still hasn't decided, still hasn't announced. Would that be a broken promise or just smart politics?
Well, it's clearly a broken promise. I mean, the Prime Minister promised it to us multiple times. If they don't proceed with the things that Anthony Albanese promised, it'll be a broken promise. It'll be a broken promise after many Australians have done their budgets for the year. I know a lot of Australians, like myself, over Christmas would have looked at how much can they spend over the next year, where they're at financially, and there were these tax cuts coming in midway through this year, and he'll reverse those within months of them coming in. So it'll be a big hit for many Australian families. Look, the simple thing is, Andrew, the Anthony Albanese government was elected with a mandate to proceed with these tax cuts. Now, if they think that these tax cuts should not proceed, we'll have an election. Have the guts to have an election. They can do that. He can go to the Governor-General, have an election, bring on an election, and let's have another vote then on whether or not the Australians back his broken promise, don't want to see tax cuts flow through to the Australian people. Have the guts to do that. And if he doesn't, he's not only can Anthony Albanese not be trusted, he'll also be gutless because he doesn't have the guts to take it back to an election and ask you for support.
I think it's very important to hold politicians to their promise before the election because they're the only control that voters have on them. Matt Canavan, thank you so much for your time. And Scott Morrison will speak this evening exclusively to Paul Murray, so don't miss that from 9 p.m. tonight. Now, there is still no explanation for the government's most incomprehensibly stupid and bloody-minded decision yet. Why it decided to literally bury all 45 of its Taipan helicopters in the ground rather than give them to Ukraine, which desperately wants them to rescue injured soldiers in its war against Russian invaders. Nothing about the government's explanation has made sense.
We do not know whether they're safe to fly. Secondly, to get them into a condition to provide to the Ukrainian government would require considerable taxpayers' expense and time and resources.
In fact, other air forces around the world think the Taipan is perfectly safe and they use it. And has the government even bothered to ask Ukraine if it would simply take the choppers as is at no cost to our army, if we're so skint? Well, the Australian Federation of Ukrainian Organisations is begging the government to reconsider. I spoke a short while ago to Oleg Prishtupa, who's a Ukrainian helicopter pilot who served in the war against Russia, now lives in Australia to mind his family while his father flies helicopters in that war. Oleg Prishtupa, thank you so much indeed for your time. Why does Ukraine need these helicopters?
Sir, in my opinion, It's this helicopter not stop war, but help for not only for Ukrainian military but also for civilian people, because now Russian Federation attack Ukrainian civilian infrastructure, and a lot of civilian people need help, quick help, and this helicopter can transport some medical stuff or search and rescue stuff very quickly. I think 2 hours in any place in Ukraine. And if Ukrainian pilots get these helicopters from Australia, range of abilities will be increased. These helicopters, it's very another level. This helicopter started to produce from 2006. For Ukraine, it's very young and new helicopter, because Ukrainian pilot use helicopters which was produced in 1970, 1980. It's very old helicopters.
Well, it seems to me that if you can get new helicopters that do the job faster and more efficient, and you get more of them, obviously lives are going to be saved on the battlefield. But the government says, our government says, these Taipans are too unsafe. Now, you are a helicopter pilot. Your father is flying helicopters in Ukraine right now in the war. Would you be happy for him to fly Taipans? Would you be thinking, oh my God, it's too unsafe?
No, it's not true. In my own opinion, I took part in the war from 2014 until 2018. In my opinion, Taipan is more safety than MiL-8 and MiL-24. It's 100%.
So what do you want our government to do?
I know that Ukrainian government gave a request for these helicopters, and in my opinion, Ukrainian government can transport these helicopters from Australia to Ukraine by Ukrainian Antonov aircrafts, which can transport at least 4 helicopters for one flight. And Ukrainian pilots have background fly for these helicopters, and Ukrainian technical staff pass some special training in France and also understand what is it. And I think it's not a big problem for Ukraine.
Well, I think if you can get those helicopters over, no expense to our army, I mean, I really do not see what the point is to bury these Taipans rather than hand them over to Ukraine, save lives, help you resist the Russian invaders. I do not get it. Oleg Pristupa, thank you so much indeed for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you too.
Sky News reporter Jonathan Lee today was reporting one of the craziest things now that has just emerged about this government grounding all our 45 Taipan helicopters last year without knowing even if the fault with this chopper really caused a deadly accident last year. The Army now doesn't have many helicopters left to deal with the evacuations and rescues it might need to do if the cyclone now bearing down on northern Queensland really hits. After the break, the ABC looks like caving into radical staff who want to be even more racist, in a good way, of course. Well, the staff war against the ABC bosses has now reached a critical point, and I'm afraid the ABC looks like surrendering. It seems to me its staff want to make the ABC even more anti-Israel, more racist in a left-wing way. 125 ABC staff have now passed the motion of no confidence in Managing Director David Anderson over the dumping of Summerfield host Antoinette Lattouf after she disobeyed orders to stop posting anti-Israel material on social media. Now, Lattouf is suing the ABC, saying it sacked her because she's an Arab, and ABC staff demanded through their union that the ABC work with unions to build a culturally informed process for supporting staff who face criticism and attack, and take urgent action on the inequality that journalists of colour face. Which sounds to me a demand that journalists on the ABC claiming an ethnic background do not get held to account when they preach divisive politics on the ABC or while they're employed by it. Meanwhile, Jewish lawyers who complain to the ABC about Lattouf are getting all sorts of abuse online. Jewish rodent is one. TikTok, you're going to be hung from a bridge very soon. Threats against families. Joining me is Morris Newman, who is a chairman of the ABC. Morris Newman, thank you so much for joining me. The managing director of the ABC, David Anderson, no confidence motion in him passed by ABC staff yesterday, 125 votes to 3, overwhelming. So how much trouble is he in, or is he in none at all if he held his nerve?
Well, I think, Andrew, good to be with you, but it seems to me that this is just another case where there are no consequences, or at least to date there have been no consequences, no accountability. The ABC goes from crisis to crisis and nothing seems to happen. And it's not just the chief executive. I mean, the board shares some of the culpability here, but this particular matter in relation to the female journalist is really just one more of these egregious examples that we've become used to with the ABC.
Well, Morris, I sort of feel that this is a real crisis moment in one way for the ABC, not because left-wing staff don't like the boss. I mean, they can go whistle as far as I'm concerned, but more that the ABC, if it gives in to their demands, will be just absolutely down the rabbit hole completely now of left-wing politics, race identity, and giving journalists who identify as of a particular minority, in this case Lebanese, free rein to just push their views despite the ABC's obligation to be impartial, given that it's taxpayer funded. Is that how you see it?
Well, I'm not being facetious, but I would ask, what's new? I mean, we've been here so many times before with Pell, with Heston Russell, and so on. The payment of Louise Milligan's personal Twitter account defamation with Andrew Lammy, nothing ever seemed to happen. Maybe this is a tipping point, and I guess it is a case maybe that the ultimate straw will break the camel's back. But to date, nothing has happened.
What about the fundamental point being made by Antoinette Lattouf, by staff, by other people of colour, as is the phrase in the ABC? The ABC is racist to its staff. Do you believe that?
Well, it's possible. I mean, this seems to me the left turning on the left. I mean, Stan Grant left on the basis of racism, but I didn't ever detect racism when I was there. But I would have thought, as a champion that seems to find race in everything, that the ABC would not be racist in its own operations. But how would I know?
If there is racism, are you disturbed by the promotion by a number of ABC staff now, or contractors, or whatever they are, of sort of anti-Israel agenda? If the ABC is going to look at something, should it look at that?
Well, of course, but I mean, as I said, the reality is that the ABC has so much form in relation to its biases, its prejudices. I don't ever see them or hear them complaining about the atrocities in South Yemen. I don't hear them about complaining about the way in which Saudis treat Ethiopian refugees. And it's clearly political, it's ideological, and it's allowed to be broadcast on the various platforms that the ABC has at its disposal. So it is this particular matter, the particular moment at least, it's to do with Palestine and Israel. Clearly there is a view within the staff that the Palestinian case should be the one that's prosecuted. There shouldn't be any balance. But again, as I say, when it comes to balance, the ABC is not a place in which you would go to.
So what should the ABC do to, or say to its rebellious staff?
Well, the rebellious staff are the people who run the place. I mean, they are the collective. That's what happens in the collective. I very much doubt that you would find that happening at News Corporation, because it's run as a proper organisation with leadership. The ABC is from the bottom up, not from the top down, and it chooses its own agendas. It runs with whichever stories suit the collective at the time. And it's time that we face up to this as taxpayers. There's $1.1 billion a year going there. And more of that, incidentally, is going to the payment of its staff, less and less into programming. You can see the impact it's having on audiences. They're declining every year and probably every month because it's taking a more narrow view of the world, and so therefore it loses other people who've got a broader perspective. But at the end of the day, I think we're looking at a terminal situation. I think the ABC has long lived past its use-by date, and it ought to be converted into some form of subscription service, and not one that needs to be funded by taxpayers for $1.1 billion a year.
I hope the Liberals finally have the courage to tackle that argument once they're in government.
Well, they were there for 9 years, Andrew. They did very little to do what you would say. So they can keep.
Morris, you are so correct. You are so correct. But I hope now that the Liberals have learned a lesson from that. Morrison, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew.
After the break, feeble Joe Biden rigs voting rules to stop rivals running against him. And voters get recorded messages in his voice telling them not to vote. Plus Rowan Dean coming up after this. Some more dirty work with voting in the US, and again to help Joe Biden. Americans are going to vote in November to choose their next president. It's hard to believe, really, that Joe Biden could serve another 4 years when he's so doddery and forgetful that his wife Jill has to tow him off the stage. In fact, Biden is now behind Trump in the polls, but won't let another Democrat candidate replace him. Normally, Democrats in New Hampshire would tonight, be able to vote on the country's first state primary for their preferred candidate. But Biden doesn't want that. He switched officially the first primary, traditionally in New Hampshire, to South Carolina instead, where a lot of black voters support him. But New Hampshire Democrats, they insist their poll go ahead anyway, so tonight could be very embarrassing for Biden. His name does not appear on the ballot. But those of two other Democrats do. One, the kooky fringe candidate Marianne Williamson, who cares? But the other is the little-known Congressman Dean Phillips, who's been campaigning hard in New Hampshire, and his poll numbers have soared there. He's now reached a respectable 32%. And on the weekend, though, someone pulled a dirty trick. They sent virtual reality recordings of someone sounding almost exactly like Joe Biden, telling Democrat voters in New Hampshire not to bother voting tonight.
Voting this Tuesday only enables the Republicans in their quest to elect Donald Trump again. Your vote makes a difference in November, not this Tuesday.
Joining me is Sean Spicer, the first White House spokesman for Donald Trump. Sean Spicer, thank you so much for joining us. Who is this Dean Phillips, and does he have even a snowball's chance?
No, he doesn't. I think he could actually do well tomorrow night in New Hampshire here, mostly because Biden's trying to have it both ways. He's not technically on the ballot, but there's a write-in campaign. And so they want to hedge their bets so that if they lose, they can say, well, we weren't even on the ballot. But they're trying to save themselves from embarrassment. To your question, Andrew, Dean Phillips is a Minnesota congressman, not very well known by any stretch of the imagination. He hasn't been sort of a leader on the progressive side or something. I mean, I think until he announced he was running, I'm not sure anyone would have known who he was. He has a good amount of family money from the gelato business, from what I understand. So he's got enough money and family fortune that he can go kind of on this quixotic mission. But look, I think after New Hampshire, I don't know how he really continues. I mean, like I said, tomorrow night, it's going to be fun for him to see if he can get 25, 30, 40%. but it's only because he can run against an incumbent president that's technically not on the ballot.
I take your point. This guy's almost certainly going absolutely nowhere. But 15, 20, 30, 40% in the polls in this primary is going to highlight one thing, isn't it? Or two things. Joe Biden needs someone to run against him because of this. Look at the state of the man. But secondly, that Joe Biden's team is actually quite prepared to rig the rules to try and avoid the scrutiny that he so richly deserves.
Yeah, it actually gets worse, right? I described how they changed the primary system. They didn't want to go to New Hampshire first. They knew that if they actually were on the ballot and that New Hampshire went first, he actually could suffer an embarrassing, I mean, he might win by, if this was real. So they put South Carolina first. But it gets worse than that, Andrew. Florida, one of the largest states in the country, canceled its Democratic primary, canceled it. It will not exist because the Democrats didn't want Biden to have to face any opposition. So it's ironic. We talk a lot on the Democratic side in this country, and our media makes a whole bunch about democracy being under attack. And then they rig the rules for him, and then they literally cancel primaries so that he won't have to face any opposition. That sounds like a party and a candidate that really has a problem with democracy.
It also sounds like a candidate that's terribly weak. What is the story with this fake call telling people telling Democrats not to turn out to this primary vote in New Hampshire?
I've read about it. I haven't actually even heard it. I've read it. I think it's somebody trying to screw with the outcome there. I mean, and these days with politics being what it is in terms of the funding and the super PACs and the outside groups and the nonprofits, who knows who's paying for it? I think the idea is to help further embarrass Joe Biden and tell Democrats, hey, you don't need to vote tomorrow because there's no delegates at stake. Save your vote for November. Obviously, that's an attempt to try to really juice up. Now, he's got additional competition. Marianne Williamson, she ran against him last time. She's polling in the single digits. But if you take her combined with Dean Phillips, if they can match, she gets 6, 7, 8%, and he gets 30%. I mean, you've got an incumbent president that doesn't look very strong coming out of this contest.
Well, someone who is looking strong is obviously Donald Trump, the Republican candidate, the former president. Now, Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, his main rival up to quite recently, has quit the race. He knows it's going nowhere and actually backed Donald Trump. Leaves Nikki Haley, Trump's former ambassador to the UN, as his last challenger, also in the New Hampshire primary overnight, but for the Republicans this time. But really, where is her campaign going? Is it all gravy from now on for Donald Trump?
Yeah, look, I think the only hope that Haley has is some kind of miraculous upset. Now, again, for your viewers to understand this, New Hampshire is very unique in that they allow unaffiliated voters, which is actually the majority of voters in New Hampshire, to vote in either primary. Well, there's no contest to speak of on the Democratic side. So you could have up to 40, 42% of the Republican primary being non-Republicans. That's what Nikki Haley is banking on. She's hoping to literally pull a political rabbit out of a hat tomorrow night.
So, Sean Spicer, you've been through all this before. I know, look, it's perilous predicting anything and have it run against you later in some YouTube clip or whatever. But how do you see Donald Trump's chances in November?
Oh, I think they're very good. And I don't think that that's, as a Trump supporter, I don't think that that's a biased opinion. If you look at the polling right now in the battleground states, and this race is going to come down to, Andrew, 8 states in America right now. 8 states will make a decision as to who the next president of the United States is. And in almost every one of them, Donald Trump's ahead. In the one, Pennsylvania, that he's not been, he's within the margin of error. The problem is that Joe Biden is one of the biggest problems that his own voters and independents in particular have is his age and his cognitive and physical ability to do the job. And when you're 81 years old, it doesn't get better. So he's got this problem with the electorate that isn't going to get better with time. And his campaign can't do anything about it. So I think that's going to continue to benefit Donald Trump. The way the economy is, the things that we face at our southern border, they're all very visual. So I think it's a very visible reminder of the contrast between the 4 years of Donald Trump and the already 3 years of Joe Biden. So my guess is it's not just somebody who's a supporter saying he's going to win or I think he can. Right now, if the election were held today, he would easily win re-election. And as I said, the problem for the other side is their major Achilles heel is something that won't ever go away.
In quite a literal sense, Biden at the moment is not going away. The Democrats are stuck with him unless something dramatic happens. Sean Spicer, thank you so much indeed for your time.
Always good to be with you, Andrew. Thank you.
The Albanese government last year spent $450 million of your money to hold a referendum on this dumb plan to divide us by race in the Constitution and create a voice. Now, you'd think that our elites could at least learn a lesson from that colossal waste of money when 60% of Australians voted no. But no. This push now to ban Australia Day, or this call today from Liberal MPs who backed the voice and lost to now appoint an Aboriginal Governor-General. We're still into that race politics? Hey, let's just pick an Aborigine. Oh no, says one of the fake Liberals who are pushing this racist tokenism, Julian Leeser. The Aboriginal Governor-General must be a unifying figure. Tom Calma, Ken Wyatt, Marshall Langton, and if health allowed, Pat Dodson will immediately spring to mind. Not to mine. I mean, is this bloke mad? He's named leaders of the Yes campaign for the Voice who wanted to divide us by race and says they're actually unifying figures instead. People like Langton, who kept abusing no voters as racists.
Every time the no case raises one of their arguments, if you start pulling it apart, you get down to base racism. I'm sorry to say it, but that's where it lands. Or just sheer stupidity.
Joining me on Culture Wars is Rowan Dean, editor of The Spectator Australia, which I subscribe to, and host of Outsiders, which I also watch on Sky News every Sunday at 9 a.m. Rowan Dean, give us more of the same thing that has been coming repeatedly to your well. The lesson of the voice referendum has not been learned.
It certainly hasn't. And Julian Leeser, seriously, he's becoming more and more like one of those irritating mosquitoes that we happen to have a lot of around at the moment, that you have to bang your ear out because he's going on and on. Julian, please give it a rest. Find another cause to get involved in. You're a smart guy. Please find something else, because the irritation factor on this is now reaching extreme. Let's be honest. There's no one in Australia who would not, over the last 10 years, have been thrilled to see an Indigenous Governor-General. No question that. We all would have loved to have seen it. Would have been fantastic. The real tragedy of what Albanese and people like Leeser and the aforementioned Marshall Langton, Noel Pearson and others did by so aggressively trying to ram the voice down the throats of the Australian people, it's been completely counterproductive. And most Australians now, we saw the numbers, literally 2/3 of Australians said absolutely no, we don't want this approach to Indigenous affairs. We don't want to divide Australians into black and white. We want us to be one harmonious group. And by separating Indigenous Australians into a separate group, getting special thises and special that's and welcome to countries and this and flags everywhere and invasion, all of that stuff, Australia has said 2 to 1, no, we will not have this. We do not want it. That is the lesson of the voice. It was a painful lesson to us for Australians to learn, but it seems, as you say, Andrew, that those who were pushing the agenda all along refused to learn that lesson, and this is only going to backfire. The sort of people that basically, the Marshall Langtons and the Noel Pearsons, anyone associated with the voice should never pop their head up again in politics again. Their arguments and their ideas have been resoundingly defeated by the Australian people and rejected by the Australian people. So we certainly can't have someone of that political failure who is now the representative of the king in this country. It's just not acceptable, Andrew. Except I suspect that Anthony Albanese will be tempted to put in Linda Burney, the Indigenous Australians Minister, into that role if he could. She'd say, oh, I'm so sick, because she was such a failure, he needs to get rid of her.
But boy, I tell you what, I know Linda Burney, and I think that she would be seriously under-equipped for that role. Pat Cummins, I mean...
Well, I hope we do see an Indigenous Governor-General in the future, Andrew, but I hope it is someone from Cairns who works in a shop there, or someone from the Kimberleys who's been working on a cattle station. Let's have a genuine Indigenous Australia, not one of these representatives of the elitist voice class who have done so much damage to race relations and to the Indigenous cause in this country.
A unifying figure. Let's just underline that. Not someone who tried to divide us by race.
Exactly.
Pat Cummins are talking about people, you know, who were on this stupid bandwagon that should have gone off a cliff. I thought it had gone off a cliff. Pat Cummins, the Australian cricket captain, says, just change the date of Australia Day away from January 26th and then we can all celebrate. Listen, can you ever see that magical day happening where Marsha Langton, Noel Pearson, Lydia Thorpe, they all celebrate Australia Day with you and me without a word of complaint, not a word of resentment, not a word of, oh, we need a treaty or we need reparations. I mean, seriously, what is this nirvana, picking a day where every single person in the country will celebrate? Never going to happen.
Well, every single person in this country should celebrate Australia, Indigenous, immigrant, colonial background, whatever your background in this country. If you are a citizen of this country, you should be grateful. As Jacinta Price has said and Tony Abbott has said, you won the lottery in life. We should all be celebrating Australia Day like it's 1988. Let's party like it's 1988, because we certainly have much to be proud of in this country, and we should all be celebrating. And if Pat Cummins and others can't see that, really take a look at yourself, Pat. Look at everything this country has given you, and maybe, and all Australians should be together celebrating. That's the way to move this country forward, Andrew.
But I don't get this idea. I think it really is something you've got to have a sort of collectivist mind tending to be of the left to believe that there is a date where everyone will come together, and until every single person buys in, we can't celebrate on that day. And everyone else should shut up, even if they're 95% of the population. What is this? I do not understand this. If Lydia Thorpe's...
It's neo-Marxism, it's Pol Pot, let's go back to year zero, wipe the slate clean and have a Marxist utopian collectivist ideal. It's garbage, it's always failed, and it's led to all sorts of problems in our history, or in world history, rather.
Yeah, but the tyranny of the minority, I just don't get it. You know, they have a few token people upset, people who are radical, people who couldn't win a voice referendum, and they say, until they're happy, we can't have Australia Day. And I just think, why? I don't get it. I just say,
exactly.
Tough. You don't want to celebrate? Don't join us. Tough. I mean, cry me a river. I don't get it.
And there are so many Australians who would love, Andrew, to have all the privileges and enjoyment of life that those elites who are pushing the voice and pushing Invasion Day and all the rest enjoy at the public's expense. And it is the average Australian, the working class Australian, who gets out there, loves Australia Day, gets the tinny out, gets the flag out, gets the thongs out, has a terrific day. That is, you can't recreate history. That is our history, and we must always treasure it and be proud of it. And the reality is there are many, many Indigenous Australians who are equally as proud of Australia Day and enjoy it equally as much, and that's what we should be proud of.
Rowan Dean, thanks for your time. That's it from me. Coming up next, Sharry Markson. Good night.